The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward like the inside of a massive cathedral. Its walls made of living crystal that hummed with ancient energy. And within this sacred space, the fate of humanity was about to be decided by beings who had never truly understood them. High Arbiter Velkith stood at the central podium, his crystalline body catching the light from 1,000 floating orbs. And his voice echoed through the chamber like the sound of breaking glass as he read from the official decree that had taken the Council 3 years to prepare the species known as humanity, originating from the planet designated Earth in Sector 7 of the Outer Rim, has been found guilty of multiple violations against the Galactic Accord, he announced. And representatives from over 200 species leaned forward in their seats, eager to witness what they believed would be a moment of great drama. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the human delegation's modest section, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her dark eyes watching the proceedings with an expression that revealed nothing of her inner thoughts. And beside her, her 2 aides shifted nervously in their seats. The charges were many, and Velkith read each one with obvious satisfaction. Humanity had refused to abandon their primitive currency systems in favor of the universal credit standard that every other species used without complaint. And this had made trade complicated and annoying for everyone involved. Humanity had declined to merge their small but surprisingly effective military fleet with the unified Galactic Defense Force, insisting instead on maintaining their own separate command structure. Humanity continued to develop and improve kinetic weapons, barbaric devices that used physical projectiles rather than the civilized energy weapons that all advanced species preferred, and they seemed almost proud of these crude instruments of destruction. Humanity had been caught conducting unauthorized research into dimensional physics, a field that the Council had declared forbidden after the catastrophe of Yell than 4,000 years ago. The list went on and on, each violation more damning than the last, and the other ambassadors nodded along with expressions of righteous disapproval. The Volthrani delegation, beings of living crystal like the High Arbiter himself, watched with cold satisfaction, for they had been the ones pushing hardest for humanity's removal. The Karathi, massive creatures that resembled mountains given life, rumbled their agreement with deep sounds that shook the floor. The Scythine, insectoid beings with gleaming black shells and clicking mandibles, could barely contain their excitement, for they had never liked the humans and their strange ways. When Velkith finished reading the charges, he looked directly at Ambassador Vasquez with what he thought was a generous expression. "The human delegation may now speak in their defense," he said. And every being in the chamber held their breath. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment when the humans would beg and plead and offer desperate concessions. The moment when these young upstarts would finally learn their place in the cosmic order. Elena Vasquez stood slowly, smoothing the front of her simple blue jacket, and walked to the speaking platform with measured steps that showed no hurry and no fear. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species after species, and then she smiled, a small, polite smile that held no warmth and no malice. "The human delegation has reviewed the charges presented by the Council," she said, her voice clear and steady, "and we acknowledge that we have indeed acted in the ways described." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber, for they had expected denial and excuses. "However," Elena continued, "we do not believe these actions constitute violations, as humanity never agreed to the specific provisions cited, and our original membership terms explicitly preserved our autonomy in these matters." The High Arbiter's crystalline features hardened with displeasure, and he interrupted her with a sharp gesture. "The Council has ruled, Ambassador, and the interpretation of the Accord is not subject to debate from provisional members. So you may save your legal arguments for those who wish to hear them." Elena nodded once, as if she had expected nothing else, and when she spoke again, her voice was perfectly calm. Then humanity accepts the council's decision. Silence fell over the chamber like a physical weight. And for a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The Scythian ambassador recovered first, her mandibles clicking with confusion as she said, "You accept the decision without protest or appeal." "That is correct," Elena replied. "You will not ask for reconsideration or offer modified terms." The Karathi representative rumbled, his massive form shifting with uncertainty. "We will not." The High Arbiter leaned forward, his crystalline eyes narrowing with suspicion. For this was not how the script was supposed to go, Ambassador Vasquez. "I do not think you understand the gravity of what has occurred here today, as your species is being expelled from the Galactic Council, stripped of all trading rights and diplomatic protections, and denied access to Council space and resources." Elena's smile did not waver as she responded, "We understand perfectly, High Arbiter, and you have nothing more to say in your defense, no arguments to present, no bargains to offer. Earth wishes the Council continued prosperity and success in all its endeavors," Elena said, and she gave a small bow that was perfectly correct in its formality. "We thank you for the 43 years of provisional membership and the opportunities it provided, and we hope that all species represented here will find the peace and progress they seek." Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her two aides falling into step behind her, and her footsteps echoed in the stunned silence of the great chamber. The High Arbiter found himself calling after her, his voice sharp with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. "You are making a grave mistake, Ambassador, as isolation from the Council will doom your primitive species to irrelevance." Elena paused at the door and looked back over her shoulder, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something that the assembled aliens could not identify, but that made several of them feel suddenly cold. "Perhaps," she said simply, and then she was gone. The chamber erupted into confused conversation, with ambassadors turning to each other with expressions of bewilderment and concern. And the High Arbiter stood at his podium, trying to process what had just happened. The Velthrani ambassador approached him with crystalline features twisted in confusion. "That was unexpected," he said, stating what everyone was thinking. "I had prepared 17 different responses for their various likely appeals, but I had no preparation for simple acceptance. It must be a negotiating tactic," the Scythian ambassador clicked. But her voice held uncertainty. "They will send messages through back channels. They will try to make deals in secret, and we must be ready." But in her private thoughts, she felt a strange unease that she could not explain in the human shuttle bay. Elena Vasquez finally allowed her shoulders to relax as she boarded the transport vessel. And as the door closed behind her, a small smile crossed her face, this one genuine. Unlike the careful mask she had worn in the council chamber, she pulled out her communication device and typed a message to Earth, encoding it with protocols that the council had never managed to break despite decades of trying. The message contained only 2 words: "It's time." As the shuttle lifted away from the council station, Elena looked out the window at the vast complex that represented the peak of galactic civilization, and she felt no sadness and no anger. She felt only anticipation. The council believed they had won a great victory today, that they had put the upstart humans in their place. But they did not understand what they had actually done. They had just removed every reason humanity had to hold back, and that, Elena knew, was exactly what Earth had been waiting for. 3 standard months passed after the expulsion, and the Galactic Council waited for humanity to respond in the ways that defeated species always responded. But what they got instead was something far more disturbing than any protest or threat could have been. They got silence. Intelligence Chief Sarath of the Karathi was the first to notice the pattern. and he brought his findings to an emergency meeting of the Council's Security Committee with a troubled expression on his massive stone-like face. Human merchant vessels have completed all existing contracts without incident, he reported, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber like distant thunder. They delivered every shipment on time, honored every agreement, and then simply did not sign new ones. The Security Committee consisted of representatives from the 12 most powerful species in the Council, and they listened with growing unease as Sorath continued his report. Human engineers working on Council stations and projects have submitted polite resignation letters citing personal reasons, and they have trained their replacements thoroughly before departing, and then they have returned to Earth without complaint or incident. That seems reasonable, the Velthrani representative said, his crystalline form flickering with uncertainty. What would you expect them to do after being expelled? I would expect anger, Sorath replied. I would expect sabotage or theft, or at the very least some heated words and hurt feelings. But there has been nothing of the sort. And that is what concerns me. He activated the holographic display in the center of the room, and a map of the galaxy appeared with human activity highlighted in blue. Watch what happens over the past 3 months, he said. And the committee watched as the blue markers began to disappear one by one, retreating from every corner of Council space like a tide going out. Within weeks, there were no humans left anywhere in the territory of any Council species, and the blue had consolidated entirely around a single point, the Sol system, humanity's home. They have recalled every single citizen, Sorath said. Every scientist, every merchant, every tourist, every student studying at our universities, and every worker employed on our stations. And they have done so without making any demands or even acknowledging that anything unusual is happening. The Scythian representative clicked her mandibles with what might have been amusement. Let them run home to their little planet, she said dismissively. What does it matter if they want to isolate themselves in protest? As they will come crawling back soon enough when they realize how much they need Council resources and technology. But Sorath shook his massive head slowly. There is more, he said, and his voice dropped lower as if he was afraid to speak the words too loudly. They are dismantling their jump gates. This statement was met with stunned silence. For jump gates were the foundation of interstellar civilization, the only way to travel between stars in reasonable time frames. And to destroy them was to cut oneself off from the galaxy entirely. That cannot be correct, the Velthrani representative said. No species would voluntarily abandon access to FTL travel, as it would be suicide for their civilization. I have confirmed it with 17 different intelligence sources, Sorath replied, and he brought up images on the display showing human ships, carefully taking apart the massive ring, structures that connected the Sol system to Council space. Every connection to Council space is being systematically removed, and based on their current rate of progress, the Sol system will be completely unreachable by conventional FTL within 6 months. The committee members looked at each other with growing concern, and the earlier satisfaction at humanity's expulsion began to curdle into something colder. This is madness, the Karathi delegate rumbled. What do they hope to accomplish by trapping themselves? Perhaps they are building new gates, someone suggested. Gates that connect the systems outside Council influence. But Sorath shook his head again. We have detected no new gate construction anywhere in human space. And their communication relays have also gone dark. Not destroyed, but simply switched off as if they no longer wish to speak with us or anyone else. He paused and looked around the room at each of the representatives in turn. I have studied humanity for many years, he said quietly. I have read their history and analyzed their psychology and tried to understand how their minds work. And I have never seen behavior like this from them. What do you mean? The Velthrani asked. Humans are loud, Sorth explained. They argue and complain and express their emotions freely and fight over small disagreements. And when they are wronged, they seek revenge or at least acknowledgement of their grievance. But they do not simply go quiet. Perhaps they are preparing something, the Scythian suggested. Though her earlier dismissiveness had faded. Some kind of attack or retaliation? With what? Sorth asked. They have no fleet capable of challenging even a single council species, let alone the entire alliance, and they have no super weapons that we know of. And they have no allies who might support them in a conflict. He brought up more data on the display. But here is what truly concerns me. As in the 3 months since the expulsion, human research output has increased by 400%. Research into what? The Karathi delegate demanded. Everything, Sorth replied. Physics, biology, engineering, mathematics, artificial intelligence, dimensional theory, and dozens of fields I cannot even identify. And they are publishing none of it, sharing none of it, and hiding all of it behind encryption we cannot break. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You think they are planning something, the Velthrani representative said slowly. I think they have been planning something for a very long time. Sorth corrected. And I think we just gave them permission to stop pretending. That night, the Scythian representative returned to her private quarters and did something she had never done before. In her long career of dismissing humanity as primitive and irrelevant, she pulled up everything the Scythian intelligence services had on human history, starting from their first contact with galactic civilization 50 years ago and going all the way back to their earliest recorded past. She read about how they had developed nuclear weapons while still fighting wars with propeller aircraft, splitting the atom before they had even developed computers. She read about how they had reached their moon within a single generation of achieving powered flight, pushing their fragile bodies into the void with rockets that were barely controlled explosions. She read about their wars, not with horror at the violence, but with a growing chill at the ingenuity and determination they showed in finding new ways to destroy each other. She read about their art and music and literature, and she saw patterns that she had missed before. A species obsessed with overcoming impossible odds, with fighting against fate itself, with refusing to accept any limit as permanent. By morning, she had not slept, and her black chitin had paled 3 shades from stress. She understood now why Sorth was afraid humanity was not sulking in isolation, and they were not preparing for revenge, and they were not going to come crawling back, begging for readmission to the council. They were doing something else entirely, something that none of the older species had anticipated because it had never occurred to them that it was possible. They were leaving the game altogether, and the Scythian representative had a terrible suspicion that when humanity emerged from their silence, the Galactic Council would discover that the rules had changed in ways they could not imagine. 6 months after humanity's expulsion from the Galactic Council, a Velthrani research vessel called the Crystal Psalm became the first alien ship to discover what had really happened to the human race. And the crew of that ship would never be the same again, Captain. Thelver had been given what seemed like a simple mission by the Velthrani Science Ministry, as he was to survey the dead zone around the Sol system and catalog any resources that might be worth claiming now that the humans had abandoned their connection to civilized space. The journey to the Tifta edge of human territory took 3 weeks using the Council's jump gate network. And when the Crystal Song emerged at the last waypoint before the gap where the human gates had once been, Thelver expected to see nothing but empty space and perhaps some debris from the dismantled structures. What he saw instead made him doubt his own crystalline eyes. Captain, his sensor operator said in a voice that trembled with disbelief, I am detecting massive energy signatures in the Sol system. And I mean massive as in larger than anything in our databases. Thelver moved to the sensor station and looked at the readings himself. And his crystalline body flickered through several colors as he tried to process what he was seeing. "These numbers cannot be correct," he said. "Check your equipment." "I have checked 3 times already," the operator replied. "The readings are accurate. And there's something else that you need to see." She adjusted the sensors to focus on a specific region of space. And the main display showed something that should have been impossible. A human ship appeared out of nowhere. Not emerging from a jump gate, but simply existing where it had not existed a moment before. And it moved across the display and then vanished again in the same impossible way. "Where did it go?" Thelver demanded. "I do not know," the operator admitted. "It did not jump to another system because there was no energy spike from a gate activation. And it did not cloak because cloaking technology still leaves trace signatures. And it simply stopped being in one place and started being somewhere else." More ships appeared on the sensors, dozens of them, then hundreds, all moving in the same impossible manner and all completely ignoring the Velthrani vessel, observing them from the edge of the system. "What are they doing?" Thelver asked. His science officer studied the readings with growing amazement and finally looked up with an expression that mixed awe with terror. "They appear to be terraforming planets," she said. 6 of them simultaneously, and they are doing it with technology I cannot explain or even begin to understand." Thelver watched the display as massive structures assembled themselves around barren worlds. And he saw atmospheres forming where there had been only void. And he saw dead rocks transforming into living worlds in a matter of hours rather than the centuries that such projects normally required. "Hail them," he ordered. And his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. The communication officer sent standard greeting protocols on all frequencies. And for several long minutes, there was no response. And Thelver began to wonder if the humans were simply ignoring them. Then a face appeared on the screen. And it was unmistakably human, a young woman with brown skin and bright eyes, and a smile that seemed genuinely friendly. "Oh, hello," she said cheerfully. "You are the first council species we have seen in a while. And I was wondering when someone would come to take a look at what we have been up to." Thelver tried to gather his dignity and respond as a proper representative of the Velthrani. "People, I am Captain Thelver of the research vessel Crystal Song, and I am here on behalf of the Galactic Council to survey this region of space." "That is nice," the human said. And her smile did not waver. "My name is Maya, and I am part of the Solar Development Initiative. And we are just doing some light construction work today." "Light construction work," Thelver repeated, looking at the display that showed 6 planets being simultaneously transformed. "You are reshaping entire worlds." "Yes, we have gotten pretty good at it," Maya agreed. "We have been practicing a lot over the past few months. And you know what they say about practice." Thelver did not know what they said about practice. And he was not sure he wanted to know. "How are your ships moving?" he asked. Because this seemed like the most important question. You have no jump gates. And yet your vessels are traveling faster than anything in council records. Maya tilted her head as if considering how to explain something complex to a child. "We do not use jump gates anymore," she said. "Gates are kind of inefficient when you think about it, as they require fixed infrastructure, and they only connect specific points, and they use a lot of energy for relatively short distances. Then what do you use?" "We fold space," Maya said simply, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. "Or maybe we step through it. Or maybe we convince the universe that we are already where we want to be. And honestly, the physics pretty weird, and I'm not the best person to explain it." Thelver felt his crystalline structure vibrate with something that might have been fear. The council banned research into dimensional physics after the catastrophe of Yelthin, he said. Entire star systems were destroyed by experiments in that field. Maya nodded with what seemed like genuine sympathy. We heard about that. And it sounds like whoever did those experiments did not really understand what they were working with. But we have had some time to figure things out. And it turns out that dimensional physics is actually pretty safe once you know what you are doing. How much time? Thelver asked, because something about her words did not make sense. You have only been isolated for 6 months, Maya laughed. And it was a warm and friendly sound that somehow made Thelver feel even more unsettled. 6 months is a lot of time when you are not being slowed down by regulations and committee meetings and having to explain everything to people who get scared by new ideas, she said. We have been very productive. She glanced at something off-screen and then looked back at Thelver with an apologetic expression. I have to go now because we have a lot of work to do. But you should probably head home before things get too busy around here. And please tell the council that we do not have any hard feelings about the expulsion thing. You do not, Thelver said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. Not at all, Maya confirmed. Actually, you kind of did us a favor, as all those council regulations were really slowing down our research and development. And now we can finally work at our natural pace. Your natural pace, Thelver repeated. Yes. And it is much faster than we were letting you see, Maya said. And for just a moment something flickered in her eyes. Not malice, but something vast and patient, and utterly beyond his understanding. We were holding back because we did not want to frighten anyone. But there is no need for that anymore. The transmission ended. And Thelver stood frozen at his station as his crew looked at him with expressions of shock and confusion behind his ship. The human construction fleet moved through space like a swarm of silver insects, their vessels appearing and disappearing in impossible patterns. And the 6 planets that had been dead rocks when the crystal song arrived were already beginning to show the blue and green of water and life. Set course for home, Thelver finally ordered. And his voice was barely a whisper. Maximum speed. As the crystal song turned away from human space, Thelver found himself wondering what the council would do when they learned the truth. Humanity had not retreated into isolation, and they had not sulked or plotted revenge, and they had not even particularly cared about being expelled. They had simply stopped pretending to be limited by the same constraints as everyone else, and now they were building a civilization that made the entire Galactic Council look like children playing with toys. Thelver did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything was about to change. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so full, as representatives from every member species had crowded into the vast crystal hall to hear Intelligence Chief Sorath present his findings about humanity. And the fear in the room was so thick that even the normally emotionless Velthrani could feel it pressing against their crystalline forms. Captain Thelver's report had spread through Council space like a plague. And in the weeks since the crystal song's return, panic had begun to take hold among species that had spent millennia believing themselves to be the most advanced beings in the galaxy. High Arbiter Velketh called the assembly to order with a sharp tone of crystal striking crystal, and the murmuring crowd fell silent as Sorath took his place at the central podium. I will begin with a simple statement, the massive Karathi said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. We were wrong about humanity, and not just slightly wrong or partially wrong, but catastrophically and completely wrong in nearly every assumption we made about their species. He activated the holographic display, and images of human history began to appear, not the sanitized version that had been presented to the council over the years, but the full, unfiltered truth that Karathi intelligence had finally pieced together. We believed that humanity was a young species that had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than skill. And we thought they needed our guidance and protection to survive in a dangerous galaxy. And we assumed that their primitive technology and aggressive nature meant they were destined to remain minor players on the cosmic stage. The display showed Earth as it had been 200 years ago, a single planet with no space presence at all. And then it began to show the rapid progression that followed in the year 1903 of their calendar. Humans achieved powered flight for the first time using machines made of wood and fabric that could barely stay in the air for a few seconds. The image showed a fragile contraption lifting off from sand dunes while men in strange clothing watched in amazement. 66 years later, they landed living humans on their moon. The chamber stirred with uncomfortable murmurs, as most species took thousands of years to progress from atmospheric flight to space travel. Not a single human lifetime, and during those 66 years, they also split the atom and created weapons capable of destroying entire cities, developed computing machines that could process information faster than organic minds, built a global communication network connecting billions of individuals, and fought 2 wars that killed hundreds of millions of their own kind. Soreth paused to let this sink in before continuing. We looked at their conflicts and called them barbaric, but we failed to see what those conflicts really showed us, which was a species capable of mobilizing their entire civilization for a single goal and achieving impossible things through sheer determination and willingness to sacrifice. The display changed to show graphs and charts that tracked human technological development over time. This is the standard development curve for a spacefaring species, Soreth said, indicating a gentle upward slope. It shows steady progress over millennia as new discoveries build on previous knowledge as society slowly adapts to change. Then a second line appeared on the graph, shooting upward at an almost vertical angle. This is humanity's development curve. Gasps and clicks and rumbles of alarm filled the chamber as the representatives saw what the data revealed. Their rate of advancement is not linear or even exponential in the normal sense, Soreth explained. It follows a pattern we have never seen before, where each breakthrough accelerates the pace of the next breakthrough, and the curve only gets steeper over time. But they were with us for 43 years. The Scythian ambassador protested, her mandibles clicking with agitation. We saw their technology, and it was only slightly more advanced than ours in a few areas. Yes, Soreth agreed, and his voice grew heavy with the weight of what he had to say next. Because they were holding back, the chamber fell silent again. We have analyzed human research patterns during their council membership, and we have found evidence of deliberate suppression and misdirection, as they published only a fraction of their discoveries, and they carefully calibrated their visible progress to remain just slightly behind the average council species. Why would they do such a thing? High Arbiter Velkith demanded. Because they were being polite, Soreth said simply. They did not want to frighten us or make us feel inferior, and they were genuinely trying to fit in and be good members of the galactic community. And so they held themselves back and matched their pace to ours. He brought up more images. These ones from Captain Thelver's encounter with the human ships. When we expelled them, we removed every reason they had to continue that restraint. And in 6 months, they have advanced further than we projected. They would advance in 2 centuries. The numbers on the display were staggering, showing human technology that exceeded council capabilities by orders of magnitude in nearly every measurable field. They have achieved practical dimensional folding for transportation, eliminating the need for jump gates entirely. And they have developed terraforming technology that can transform dead worlds in weeks rather than centuries. And they have created artificial intelligences that work alongside humans as partners rather than servants. And they have done all of this while apparently considering it routine progress. The Scythian ambassador rose from her seat with a clicking sound that indicated both fear and anger. "Can we fight them?" she demanded. "If we united the entire council fleet and struck now before they grow even stronger." Soreth turned to face her directly, and something in his expression made her take a step backward. "Ambassador, I need you to understand what I am about to tell you," he said slowly. "The humans are not building warships because they do not need to. As their construction vessels and science ships and cargo haulers are all so far beyond anything we possess that our entire combined military would pose no threat to them whatsoever." He paused and then continued with even greater weight in his words. "We are not their enemies, and we are not their rivals, and we are not even significant enough to be considered obstacles. As to them, we are simply neighbors who happen to live in the same galaxy." "Then, what do they want?" the High Arbiter asked, and his crystalline voice cracked with something that might have been despair. "Revenge for the expulsion, conquest, domination." "No," Soreth said, and this seemed to disturb him more than anything else. "Based on all available intelligence, they do not want anything from us at all. And they are not angry about being expelled. And they are not planning to punish us or rule over us. Then what are they doing?" Soreth brought up the final piece of data, showing the trajectory of human expansion and development projected forward over the coming years. "They are leaving," he said. "Not the galaxy exactly, but they are leaving us behind, as they have found something out there in the depths of space that interests them more than we do. And they are building toward goals that we cannot even comprehend." The chamber sat in stunned silence as this truth settled over them like a weight. They had spent millennia believing themselves to be the pinnacle of intelligent life in the universe, the wise elders who guided younger species toward civilization. And now they were learning that they had been passed by without even knowing it. A species they had dismissed as primitive and aggressive had been quietly humoring them the entire time, playing along with their rules and respecting their customs and pretending to need their help. And now that species was ascending to heights that the council could barely imagine. "What do we do?" someone finally asked. And the question hung in the air like a desperate prayer. Soreth had no answer to give them. He had spent his entire career studying threats and developing strategies to counter them. But this was not a threat in any sense he understood, and there was no strategy that could close the gap between what the council was and what humanity had become. All they could do was watch and wait and hope that the humans remembered them kindly. Because if humanity ever decided that the Galactic Council was a problem rather than a curiosity, there would be absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop them. 1 year after the expulsion, a human ship appeared at the edge of Council space, and every sensor in the region screamed warnings that the watching officers could not understand because the vessel seemed to exist in ways that their instruments were not designed to measure. The ship was not large by human standards, perhaps the size of a small council cruiser, but it hurt to look at directly, as if the eye kept trying to see dimensions that were not supposed to be visible, and the beings who observed it felt a strange sensation of smallness that had nothing to do with physical size across the entire galaxy. Every communication system capable of receiving transmissions suddenly activated at the same moment, and a face appeared on screens and displays and holographic projectors in every council station and ship and planet. It was Ambassador Elena Vasquez, though she looked different than she had a year ago, as there was something in her eyes that suggested she had seen things that had changed her in fundamental ways. And her smile was warm, but carried depths that made ancient Velthrani elders feel young and ignorant. "Hello, old friends," she said, and her voice was gentle and kind, in a way that somehow made the words more powerful rather than less. "We thought it was time to check in and let you know how things have been going." Throughout Council space, billions of beings stopped what they were doing and watched in frozen silence. Humanity has appreciated this time of reflection. Elena continued. We have grown and changed in ways that are difficult to describe. And we have discovered things about the universe that have given us new purpose and new direction. She paused and seemed to look directly at each viewer simultaneously, as if the transmission was somehow personal to every single being who received it. We have decided that holding grudges is not a very productive use of our energy, and we want you to know that we do not blame you for the expulsion, as you were acting according to your nature and your understanding of the universe. And we cannot fault you for being what you are. In the council chamber, High Arbiter Velketh watched with crystalline tears forming in his eyes. Though he could not have explained why we are going somewhere now, Elena said, and excitement crept into her voice despite her obvious efforts to remain calm. Somewhere far and strange and wonderful, as we have found things at the edges of reality that call to us, and we cannot resist the urge to explore and discover and grow. She smiled, and it was the smile of a parent watching children take their first steps. But we remember our time with you, and we remember the good moments and the genuine friendships that some of us formed. And we do not want to simply vanish without offering you a choice. The transmission shifted, and behind Elena, viewers could see glimpses of something vast and beautiful. Structures of light and energy that stretched across distances too large to comprehend. And beings that might have been human or might have been something more moving through spaces that followed no rules. The council species understood. This is an invitation, Elena said. Not to join our council because we do not really have councils anymore, but to come with us if you want to see what we have built and help us build more. To grow alongside us as we reach for things that none of us ever imagined. She spread her hands in a gesture of welcome that transcended cultural boundaries. You pushed us out because we were different. And that is okay because we understand fear. And we understand the comfort of things staying the same. And we understand how threatening change can feel when you are not ready for it. Her expression softened with compassion. But we are offering something better than fear now. And we are offering wonder. As the universe is so much bigger and stranger and more beautiful than any of us ever dreamed. And there is room for everyone who wants to be part of discovering it. In stations and ships and cities across council space, beings looked at each other with expressions that mixed terror and hope and longing. The gate will stay open for 1 standard year, Elena said, and the transmission showed coordinates that led to the edge of human space. Anyone who wants to come is welcome regardless of species or history or what you might have said about us in the past. As we have no interest in revenge and no desire to punish those who treated us poorly. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. And to those who choose to stay behind, we wish you well, truly and sincerely, as the stars are vast enough for everyone, and your path is your own to walk, even if it takes you somewhere different than ours. Be kind to each other, she added softly. Be curious about the universe around you, and do not let fear prevent you from reaching for things that seem impossible, because we have learned that impossible is often just another word for not yet. The transmission flickered, and Elena smiled one last time. Goodbye, old friends. And thank you for 43 years of memories, both good and bad. As they helped make us who we are today, the screens went dark, but the coordinates remained burning in the minds of every being who had witnessed the message in the council chamber. Silence reigned for a long moment, and then the Velthrani ambassador rose from his seat and began walking toward the exit with steady, determined steps. Where are you going? The High Arbiter demanded, his voice sharp with confusion and something that might have been envy. The Velthrani turned, and for the first time in his long life, there was something like hope shining in his crystalline eyes, something that made him look young despite his centuries of age. I am going to see what is on the other side of that gate, he said simply. I am going to discover what they have found and learn what they have learned. And I am going to stop being afraid of change. You cannot simply abandon your position, the High Arbiter protested. You have responsibilities and obligations to your species and to the Council. The Velthrani ambassador laughed, and it was a sound that his colleagues had never heard from him before. My species spent 10,000 years believing that we had reached the peak of what was possible. And now I have seen proof that we barely understood the first steps of the journey. And you want me to stay here and attend committee meetings? He shook his crystalline head with something like pity. You can stay if you want to. And you can pretend that nothing has changed. And you can tell yourself that the humans are dangerous or foolish or headed for disaster. But I am done pretending. He resumed his walk toward the exit. And before he reached the door, another representative stood up. And then another. And then a dozen more. Beings from species that had been rivals for millennia, now united by a single shared desire. They wanted to see what lay beyond the gate. They wanted to grow in the weeks that followed. Ships began streaming toward the coordinates that Elena had provided. Vessels of every size and design carrying beings who had decided that wonder was worth more than safety. Some were scientists eager to learn, and some were explorers hungry for new horizons, and some were simply ordinary people who had watched the transmission and felt something stir in their hearts that they could not ignore. The High Arbiter watched them go with a mixture of resentment and regret. And he told himself that they were fools chasing fantasies. But late at night, when no one could see him, he pulled up the coordinates and stared at them for hours. 1 year was a long time, and the gate would remain open. And perhaps even he might find the courage to step through it before the end. Far away, at the edge of mapped space, humanity waited with open arms and patient smiles, ready to welcome anyone who wanted to join them on the next great adventure. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, full of mysteries that no species had yet discovered. And for the first time in galactic history, the beings of the Council understood that they were not the end of the story. They were barely the beginning, and somewhere out there, in dimensions and spaces that defied understanding, humanity was